Hello and welcome to Meet the Mason, where we interview Masons as they share their experiences and life stories. Hello and welcome again to Meet the Mason. Today I'm here with a very special guest, Brother Brian Hesler. Hi Brian, how are you today?
Hi Brother Justin, doing well today, thank you, and thank you for the time and having me on the show here.
Thank you for being here. So it's always really helpful to, have another brother that shows up and, willing to sit down and have a talk with us.
Well, that's really what a lot of it's about is showing up for us. We all know that our journeys are unique, right? But they're all very similar. But as we'll talk about later, I'm sure a lot of the experience is what you put in is equal to what you get out.
I'd say it's even more, but yeah, you're right.
Agreed.
You get what you give. Yeah. So, we have a handful of standard questions and we just kind of tend to go through them. So, Brother Brian, who were you before Masonry?
That is a bit of a loaded question. My background was quite dynamic. I grew up in not the best scenario, single parent household, did a lot of moving around. But as a benefit there, I learned how to make friends quickly and how to fit in, right? That got me by through my formative years, through high school, etc. But I came from a very low place in society. And as I grew up and as I saw the world evolving around me, and again, the flexibility of the relationships that I made and I grew through those years, I made steady promises to myself to be better and to try and elevate what I thought was my status in life, right? But a lot of that just came to, I don't want to, if I ever had a family, I don't want them to want for things. I don't want them to be cold in the winter or hungry or anything like that. And so I went to work quickly. Right after graduation, I went to the Marine Corps. I enlisted, went through training, did a combat tour in Iraq, came back, and I had my eyes set on a commission with the Marine Corps to fly. And to do that, I'd have to have a college degree. So when we got back from our combat tour, I was with the reserve unit, and we deactivated, went back to a reserve status. And at that time, I started school for engineering. And this was all in Southwest PA. And from there, I did 2 years of school and made a move down to Virginia in 2008. It was early summer 2008. And that transition turned out would have made school very, very expensive for that following year. So having a year as a buffer to be eligible for in-state tuition, I ended up going to work, and I needed something to get by, something to make money to sustain myself. I was dating a young lady who was from around here. Her father was a colonel at the Pentagon, and he was all over the place. And she was genuinely the reason, and ended up in this area, in the Fredericksburg area. So during that time, I started doing contract work, defense contracting. I had a significant amount of technical skills from my engineering classes. I had a lot of hands-on skills from my time in the Marine Corps. A lot of that military mindset kind of set me up for success before I even realized it in that contracting world. And so what started as a bridge year until I could get back into school turned into a lot of effort towards the defense contract world, right? And I did that for a year. It was a lot of hands-on design and fabrication of electronics and things of that nature for the missions we supported. And then I had an opportunity to join a mobile training team to travel around the country training U.S. forces, mostly DoD, some Department of Justice types, things like that. A lot of security, personal safety, hazard awareness, hazard mitigation, things like that. And that was actually the time I was traveling probably 2 to 3 weeks of every month for the better part of a year. But that first mobile training team was actually where I kind of got my introduction to the craft. My team lead, he was a retired Army bomb tech, spent the twilight years of his career with Delta. And so it was a very fascinating personality, one of the most soft-spoken individuals you could ever come across. And so getting to know him through our time on the road, I had noticed the light that he shined, mostly in the jewelry that he wore, but also just how he conducted himself, very much the quiet professional, if you will, that you would expect from somebody who spent time in the special operations arena. But there was something about him that was just a little bit more, because a lot of the guys we worked with were either retired Rangers or Green Berets, SEALs, things of that nature, due to the nature and content of the curriculum that we taught and who we taught it. And so I was able to strike up conversations with him, and he was very candid. He was a Mason out of a lodge in, I think, Spokane, Washington. And it was a kind of a scenario where everybody would live where they lived and come together at wherever we were teaching. But I'd spend a lot of time with him, and I really grew fond of him and admired his outlook on life and how he approached both work and social life.
That's some pretty interesting stuff. The idea that, as soon as you said that you were with MTT, I went, wow, that's actually some pretty impressive stuff, and, but to hear all that, I've noticed that a lot of guys who have gone, especially in the military and law enforcement circles, there tends to be this, what do you want to call it? I always call it the gross matter, right? That's more of an alchemy reference, but, you have a lot of these guys who they're focused on kind of Maslow's lower tiers of his pyramid, right? So you have, a lot of these guys who are focused on the here and now, their base passions, I'm hungry, I'm tired, whatever all that stuff is, that's what they tend to focus on.
Yeah, what gets them by day to day.
That's exactly it, and, they a lot of people, they tend to not really see past their nose in that respect. So to hear that somebody, that there are other people in those military law enforcement circles who can kind of see past all of that and say, yeah, this is great, but what of the soul? What happens after this? I'm not going to be, strong and, ready to fight people forever, So
exactly.
Yeah. So I imagine that's probably what that brother from Delta was talking about all that time. So, so he's the one that led you to masonry. Is pretty much it, right?
He was kind of the fulcrum, if you will. But I'll be honest, pop culture did a good bit for me too. At that time in my life, I was also um, my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, and I had a fascination with the National Treasure movies, and then I started reading a lot of books that you read about and that have Masonic influence or references to things in our craft, and so it became like a growing fascination to which I saw the repetitive message to be one, ask one, and so I flat out asked that team leader of mine, Brother Don Riley was his name, and shout out to him, because if it weren't for that relationship, like I said, I don't think that I'd be here talking with you right now. But I asked him, and he kind of walked me through the process of what it takes, and I found the petition for this lodge online. This was my local lodge at the time, and well, still is. But I found the petition, and on the next time we were together on the road, he was my first line signer, and I knew nobody at this lodge, but I was under the guidance of, again, what I would call a pre-mentor, if you will, Brother Riley. I came up on one of their stated communication nights and knocked on the door, and I was greeted with a hearty hello, and basically walked in, and the first gentleman who met me at the door, Brother Jeff St. Ange, he ended up being my second line signer. And from there, I went through, did my investigation, and they saw a fortune to vote me in, and the rest is kind of history.
And that's really awesome. Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned Jeff St. Ange. Gosh, I remember around 2013 and stuff like that, when I was going through the degrees, I was getting really stressed out about, I guess I just took things too much verbatim, right? So, it had this odd little tendency of being, okay, well, this is how it has to be word for word. And only to eventually kind of come to realize, especially with Brother Jeff's help, he just said, buddy, it's not supposed to be taken literally, man. It's not in every, this, you're not supposed to build this as a 100% building block. This is a guideline. This is supposed to help you. What is this really trying to say? It's not saying you need to do 8, 8, and 8. It's saying you need to divide your time wisely. You have 24 hours in a day. What are you going to do with it?
Find a good balance for all of what we do.
And that's exactly it, right? So to kind of hear his perspective on things, that was the best thing about Jeff St. Ange, is that he always had perspective, and he would always look at me, especially after a relatively privileged conversation that perhaps most other members of the lodge might not have been privy to, but he would just look at me and go, what's he going to do, right? 18 years old, what's he going to do? Who's he going to tell, right? But as soon as all that stuff was, at some lull in the conversation, he would always turn to me and like, so Justin, what do you think? I went, not realizing, what he was looking for was actually input, and saying, like, we're including you in this, this will be your lodge in the future. At some point, this will be a lodge that you will have to take charge of too someday. This isn't just, and the whole time I'm like, dude, I'm still learning, man. I'm sitting here and I'm watching, and I'm like, I really don't know, man. So I don't know if he thought that I wasn't paying attention, or if he knew that the gears were turning and I was just trying to put 2 and 2 together. But it's great to hear that Jeff St. Ange signed for you too, because he was actually, he's always been a pretty great guy about all those things. So yeah, I mean, talking about your mentors, and it tracks, hearing about national treasure and stuff like that. During that time frame, yeah, it was a pretty big deal.
It got some chuckles because that was one of my genuine answers on, why do you want this? I was like, well, I want to find the glasses and the brick and the hidden chimney somewhere. And so a good humor with it all, right? And so pop culture is going to be what it is. But that being said, it was still, again, one of the reasons that I was so fascinated and interested. And I'm genuinely thankful because making my entrance into this fraternity has turned out to be long-term one of the best decisions I can think of, both in terms of, the benefits of being a member. Personally, for me, I was always an introvert for a long, long time, even going through the Marine Corps where they kind of force you out of your shell, whether you like it or not. I still kind of had those reserved tendencies, and I could break out and be extroverted when I needed to. And for a long time, I did it as necessary, but it was very draining. But here I found a connection with the brothers that I can be out there and not feel expended because of it. It's the only thing outside of my personal family and a select few friends that has kind of given me that level of comfort amongst a group of, I'll call them peers. So
I like that. Yeah. So I remember having a lot of experiences like that in the patrol. Sure. Yeah. They'll force you out of your shell, they will. Right. And then at some point you finally kind of come to that same realization where it's like, you know what, we're all messed up. It doesn't matter what I say, So I get it. And, in my case, I think I ended up dealing with a lot of guys who had some kind of, no, I don't claim to be extremely smart, right? But let's just say that I had more than 2 brain cells to rub together. And the entire time I just sat there and I was like, dude, if I just don't open my mouth, nobody will catch on. But of course, at some point you're going to have to open your mouth. And the second that I go, that's the moment they're like, okay, smart guy over here. And I'm like, oh. And I always caught flack for it.
Right.
So,
your new road name's Einstein.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, I actually did there was a training exercise, and I don't know how much I'm allowed to talk about it, but essentially, we were talking about falling objects and objects that could be thrown and stuff like that, as a means of, defending yourself out where we were. And this instructor basically said, see, even if you drop it, you can articulate that, it's accelerating. And I whispered this. I mean, it was a mumble. There's no way that this guy should have been able to hear this, but I said, at a rate of 9.8 wind meters per second squared, right? And he goes, what? And I said, nothing, sir. And he's like, no. I already took the time to address it, so now we actually have to address it. So what did you say? I said, well, it would accelerate at a rate of 9.81 meters per second squared. And this guy looked like I pissed in his Cheerios. I mean, he looked so mad. And he just said, what are you doing here with us? What are you doing in this agency? And I just sat there, and in the back of my head, I sat there and I thought, I ask myself the same thing every single day. But I didn't say anything. But as we were walking back to, because we were out in the field for this instruction piece, and then we come back to a particular, I don't know what you want to call it, but the bleachers or the classroom setting. Yeah. And as we're walking back, he's sitting there complaining to his fellow cadre, right? He's like, listen, this is what I do for a living. This is my law enforcement position. I don't know all this equals MC squared. But, oh man, I'm going to get a lot of flack for this one. And Luckily, it didn't go anywhere because I'm pretty sure, basically around the time for the training grounds, everybody was kind of like, all right, yeah, we already know what's up with this guy,
Yeah.
So
You would think they would relish in having an asset like that in the ranks, right?
yeah, but they don't. Well, or if they do, and I don't really understand why. I don't know if it's just a matter of questioning things.
I think a lot of that falls into ego and self-preservation. For better or worse, I see a lot in the defense and law enforcement circles, such a scarcity mindset where people are afraid for, especially in today's climate, afraid for their job, afraid for their salary, afraid for whatever it is that might take away what they have or usurp them out of line. And so I think a lot of it comes down to that self-preservation mindset. And unfortunately, that keeps a lot of good people down and probably a lot of poor choices up. But at the end of the day, these organizations are what they are. And I think we just need to hope that they're doing the best by the means that we give them to do their job.
Yeah. Well, my experiences out there kind of made me realize just how much the world just hangs on by a thread. We act as if we have everything in control, we do our best, but, truth of the matter is that, the whole world hangs on by a thread, and one dumb guy's decision, might make things a little bit crazier, so, and you're right. I think a lot of it does kind of boil down to ego, and I think that's probably one of the better things that Freemasonry champions is actually kind of the idea of subduing that. And it's not so much about, kind of elevating your own so much as it is kind of, subduing it,
Yeah.
So, no, I get it. And actually, that leads us into our next question. How has Masonry influenced and impacted your life?
Well, to the point you just mentioned, taking myself from my former dynamic, what I'll call very passionate personality, and finding ways to channel my energies in a more productive way. Not that I was ever too extreme in any given scenario, but if you can imagine a kid who grew up rough and then went straight into the Marine Corps, looking forward to combat, going to combat, and then coming back and kind of going straight into like a collegiate, I'm free to my own means and ends. Definitely there were times where I took things to excess. Thankfully never got myself in any heat for anything or did anything really irrational, but I definitely made some choices that were probably not the best choices. And coming to the fraternity really kind of opened my eyes to introspection, I think is the better word, and trying to, again, take the rough ashlar, that rough stone, and figure out ways to chip off those rough edges and try and find progress towards that more perfect end piece. And it's one thing I know that we're here for a lifetime, right? And that endeavor is a lifelong endeavor. But the more that I have been around the craft, the more exposure I have to like-minded individuals and seeing them and how they conduct themselves, hearing some of their stories, seeing where they came from, what they've gone through, what they're going through, and how they maintain and posture themselves in this life. It's very awe-inspiring. Like, it's such a diverse group. And we're all similar in that we have, similar qualities that brought us to the craft and enabled us to join. But at the same time, everybody struggles their own. And it's been very eye-opening to see folks that, when I hear their story, and to me, I empathize, but I see their struggle is greater than my own. But if they are standing upright and presenting a great front and being an exceptional human and an exceptional citizen, an exceptional brother, and seeing them put forth that extra effort, again, it makes me want to try harder myself. And it's a daily struggle. There's, and I reference these trying times that we have today because there's a lot to consider, a lot to deal with, not just with myself, but dealing with others. Not everybody is so aware of themselves and their surroundings, and trying to be as understanding, compassionate, and helpful where I can be, but also finding myself trying to, whether it's overtly or covertly, trying to help and influence others that might need it. Again, whether that's helping somebody at work with a project or hearing somebody complain and offering to listen and genuinely trying to listen, to understand, not to reply. And so, again, a lot of it comes down to, I still am a very passionate person I have a lot of very strict beliefs, and a lot of those have conflicted with societal norms or the direction of societal norms. And just trying to find the balance of, understanding where people come from and how can I react, and how can I look back at my obligations that I took as part of my journey in the craft to respond better to what's around me. I think that's really kind of my biggest daily focus, is trying to remind myself of my obligations, and if I am straying from those, figure out why and correct it.
And that's actually one thing that I really like about your story is that, you talk about your rough upbringing, your kind of, just as rough, if not rougher time, as a young guy, and then coming up and this track of growth, that you truly from darkness to light, from how you talk about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And, and you're going from don't think, just react to, okay, think and then act, and it's actually it's a really cool thing to see. So that's awesome. And you're talking about, watching other people, watching other brothers, especially who, they get out there and no matter what's eaten at them, they're still standing up every day. That brings me into heroes. Who are your Masonic heroes?
That is kind of an open topic for me, if that makes sense, because again, so for the audience's sake, I came into the craft 2009, 2010, and I was active as much as I thought was good for the first several years. And I saw a lot of things a lot of personalities come and go. Some were really great folks. Others I appreciated as brothers, but I left it at that. And then I got called away work, back to the contract work, right? I started overseas contracting, and that had me traveling back and forth quite regularly, mostly to the Middle East. And so I had the good fortune of being away from this lodge for some time. It gave me the opportunity, especially over one key memory I have is Afghanistan circa 2011, 2012. I was in Kandahar on the air base, and there was a lodge that met there regularly. It was chartered under the Grand Lodge of Canada, and there were several members from multinational armed forces and multinational contract workers and such. I did write back to the lodge secretary here, made sure it was okay for me to communicate with them. And when I got the green light, that turned into a regular meeting for whoever was available at the time. We would have movie nights, or we would put together, all the goodies that we got from care packages and come together, did some degree work over there. It was very interesting to see the Canadian flavor of the craft at work. But all the while, when I would come back, if I had the opportunity, I would come into lodge. But again, going back to my reserved personality for a long time, I would show up, I would shake hands, I would smile, grin with everybody. And for the most part, I wouldn't stick around. I felt it more important that the time that I had at home was spent as much with my family as possible. At the time, I had, through it, I had a growing family from 1 to 3 children. And so with that, there were a few strong brothers through and through. One of those, I'm thankful that I see him on a regular basis now, Brother Shelby Chandler. I was always fascinated by his breadth and depth of knowledge and his fascination with history. And he always had something interesting to say, but he was always there. I could always count on seeing him, shaking his hand, giving him a big hug. And another one was Brother Kevin Valentine. He and I, we did some service projects. The big one that comes to mind was one of our widows needed her front porch painted, cleaned and painted. And he lived not far from me at the time. And so we ganged up on it, knocked it out, and went and hung out in his garage for a couple hours afterward, just talking and kind of just growing that bond, right? And he was one of the few people that during my time away, like he would reach out, see how I was doing, see where I was at those days, which for a period I didn't get a lot of that. And it kind of put me in a difficult spot with regards to my consideration of the lodge and the craft. But I've come to understand that it is what it is sometimes, right? And there are times where folks don't see much beyond their current field of view. Where the lodge is at now, having come back within the last year and found myself becoming more and more active in the lodge, it has been a fantastic change of atmosphere, and being part and parcel of the meetings where we're talking about how do we do better to outreach to the community? How do we do better to outreach to our membership? more especially the folks that haven't been active or can't be for one reason or another. And so seeing the progress in our lodge specifically has been really good. And that leads me into my ultimate answer to this question is all the brothers that I see on a regular basis right now, seeing their individual story and their individual input, their individual contributions, and then seeing its effect on our craft, our lodge, our community as a whole, really makes me admire a lot of these men. And so I can't really say that I have necessarily any singular heroes. I have folks that stand out here and there. And of course, I could have opened this up with, illustrious brother George Washington, because why not? It's Lodge 4, and that's kind of one of our staples. But looking to men of that caliber, the founding fathers, and then fast forward to today, and what potential impact are the brothers around me going to leave on the books of history? What are the books going to talk about, and what are they going to say about us in 100, 200 years? And so I see a bunch of upright men doing great things and just doing it day by day. And so, I really appreciate everybody that we have here. And so that's what I would call my heroes.
That's a beautiful response. I mean that, because, we both came up in the lodge at a very different time from what the lodge is like now. It is not the same place that, we got our degrees in. It might be the same building, but it's definitely not the same flavor of what everything's like. So, to know what it was, I had to step away too, and when I came back, it really was a massive change, and Chris Tripp did a lot to facilitate that. But the world will change. It's a good example of that model, that the world will change if we do, so, and to your point, when I was going through the academy, I had an instructor he was our PT instructor, and he always tore us up, but he was part of a tactical team. And one of the best things that he told me, well, he really just told the class, was, it's not about what you've done for me, it's about what you've done for me lately. And so whenever I hear the responses of George Washington and all that stuff, that's great. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes we need a litmus, right? And to sit there and go, okay, that's our plumb line. That's what we shouldn't exactly be like that, to a T, but we should try to emulate that. And that's great, but that's what you've done for me, but what have you done for me lately? What have you done for the world? What have you done for the lodge, masonry as a whole, your fellow human being? Sure, you belong to this organization that founded an entire nation, because they wanted to, throw off the yoke, if you will, and actually become free. And that's wonderful. But what have we done lately?
Right. You have to consider the atmospherics of the times that we live in now versus, back then, of course. Again, they left their stamp on history the way that they did. But again, how do we consider the same? What does the world need now? And I think for us as individuals, that starts with us as individuals and expands from our circle, right? So what do I need to do to be a better individual? What do I need to do to be a better, provider or contributor for my family? And then from there, my community and my lodge, right? And if what I am doing makes sense to continue growing that impact or trying to grow that impact into larger areas or different areas, then absolutely. But again, it all starts with the individual, and again, being surrounded by quite a respectable group of individuals. They say you're a culmination of the 5 closest people you surround yourself with, and having much more than 5, again, upstanding individuals around you at any given time, kind of accelerates that sentiment. And so I see others, again, giving, and it makes me also want to give.
Yeah. Well, it brings me back to the idea of a cornerstone. The first stone of public buildings is usually placed in the northeast corner. And it makes you think back to a handful of times within the craft where you sit there and you go, oh, okay. Then it makes you realize, no, I am the cornerstone, I am the new change, and it's funny that we, so many people resign themselves to say, somebody should do something, but it's nice to be able to say, no, you are somebody, so.
And that's nice to see people take charge of their situation, if you will, instead of just noting a problem or something that needs work or needs change. Don't just complain about it. Come with a solution, or at least have a discussion about how can we improve this, but also be willing to do a little bit of something to contribute, right?
Right. Oh, yeah. So we talked about how masonry, basically your entire journey up until today. So how does masonry affect you today?
Again, I go back to mindset and daily considerations. Just trying to be a better version of myself for those around me who count on me, and hoping that propagates out far and wide, to be honest.
I like that. And, well, this makes, this whole conversation kind of makes me think about it. Of all the working tools, which is your favorite?
I would have to say at this point in my life is the 24-inch gauge, because one of the more recent lessons I've been forcing myself to learn is to how to more properly separate my time between my work, my home, my rest. I find myself giving a lot more of myself in many situations. I'm one of the go-to folks at my work, and because of it, I find that I'm helping a lot of folks and spending a lot of extra time and effort there, and now trying to forcibly find time, or make the time rather, to prioritize my family now that I'm not overseas all the time, and give myself a chance to rest. But also with, again, going back to my growing involvement back in the lodge, and I'm finding a lot of fulfillment in trying to serve the lodge and the things it's doing for the membership, for the community, and finding ways to, incorporate my family, encourage them to, come to the fundraiser events, and they're very supportive. And so even when they aren't there with me doing the things, they're extremely supportive of me doing this. But because of that, I'm also trying to balance work and home better, so that way they do have an adequate amount of time and attention. And so it's, again, that daily battle of what's really important when it comes to work, social, family, rest. So, yeah.
And I can respect that. There are a lot of people out there who, a lot of men out there who they get so caught up in everything that they're doing and being busy and the adventure and, all that stuff, but they don't actually sit down with their families, So it's actually really nice it's refreshing to hear somebody's actually say, no, I'm actually going to take the time for my family. That's huge.
And they deserve it. Like I said, with me having been busy and away for a considerable amount of time, my wife bore that burden. And she did a lot of work and she made a lot of sacrifices so that way I could do those things. It did provide well for my family, but at what cost? And so I'm trying to give her the time back that she deserves, trying to give my kids the proper time they deserve. Because that's, again, one of those other kind of morality lessons, takeaways from this craft is what kind of person do you want to be, and what's a better version of yourself. And when it comes down to it, I can make a ton of money, but that's not going to buy me love. It's not going to buy me time back. And it genuinely hurts to think about the time lost that's in the past, but trying to find ways, again, not to make up for it per se, but to give the time that I can now that they deserve for their sacrifices. So.
Wow. That's profound, because, and I'm actually dumbfounded, man. I'm awestruck, man. Shoot, iron sharpens iron here. That's one of the best things about it. I grew up as a military brat myself, and, you only get one dad, I don't necessarily have the best relationship with my parents. To hear that, you're actually conscientious about it and, you're sitting there going, okay, well, what can I do now? It's, what happened in the past is what's in the past, and it sucks that this happened, but what can I do now to fix it? That's huge. That's huge. That's some intense accountability there.
It was a burden I carried for a long time, that I think it really probably kept me back more than it allowed me to progress. Using, I guess, hiding guilt and thinking it's virtue, for feeling bad that I was away or doing things. But like I said, what I did, I had specific purpose in mind for it when I did it, and my family is better off for it today. However, I've been learning, like I said, to subdue those feelings and move forward in a more positive manner. So, coming back to the lessons that the craft teaches us.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. And of course, channeling those feelings, I think so many times people think, subdue your passions and become a robot, but, really it's, how do I channel this appropriately? So I always admired that. So speaking of which, from a Masonic lens, what have you accomplished so far that you're really proud of?
I think that sticking around for as long as I have, I was looking back at our trestle boards from this year, and May of this year was my 15-year anniversary. And that's kind of a striking number to look at, because it doesn't feel like 15 years ago that I was initiated, passed, and raised. That being said, my cable toe was so short for so long it was better part of a decade that I had little to no attendance here. I was fortunate that early on I had the ability to become a life member of this lodge. And because if I hadn't, I might have very well seen those dues payment as an unnecessary burden, and I may have very well demitted. And so I find it fortunate that circumstance, if you will, or unwitting life choices has led me to maintain my membership and come back at this time where, like we alluded to, it's a much different atmosphere in our lodge. And I think just maintaining my membership this long to discover what this place has become has been my achievement so far. I suppose if the membership is so gracious as to accept, I hope to be on the line, the leadership line, the officer line here in the coming years, and see what I can do from a matter of service and impact to the lodge from that perspective.
And I think that's great because, so I was, it's funny that you mentioned 15 years just went by in a flash. It really does. So what, I think I was initiated 2013, September 2013. It does not feel anything like that. I mean, it went by in a snap. So to hear your story about that, yeah, I'm with you. It really, it's shocking for lack of better words.
It is. But it's also an interesting perspective because one of the things that I have found true is like the sign that we have over the baker room door, where inside there are no strangers, just friends you may not have met yet. And in my travels, both domestic and abroad, I have found myself recognizing and sometimes breaking bread with other brothers. And it all starts off with some form of mutual recognition, and whether that's something overt, noticing a ring, noticing the way that, somebody positions their body, right? And to most folks, it wouldn't even be a second thought that a gesture or a ring or a lapel pin would mean anything. But to us, we know. And if nothing else, it's a good conversation. I'm confident that no matter where I end up in life, in the world, if I need a helping hand, that helping hand will be there. And I hope that maybe someday I can be that helping hand for somebody else that might need it as well. And so, it's one of those profound things that no matter how much time has passed or how quickly it seems like it's passed, it's the same message. It's a universal language for us in the fraternity, to know and care for each other.
To know and care for each other. You're absolutely right. And it's funny because that line that goes over the baker room door, I think about that all the time. There are no strangers here, only friends who haven't met yet, and man, it rings true all the time. No matter where I go, especially in the Masonic sense, no matter where I go in the world, somehow, somewhere, there's a brother who's ready to welcome you with open arms. And, in a previous episode, I told a story about how in Phoenix, I ended up absolutely dehydrated and sun poisoned and stuff like that. And they actually took me in and took care of me. So to hear these kinds of stories, to not just hear them, but experience them for yourself, to be a part of it, in the making to throw into the pot. We don't just bear witness, we contribute. So it's amazing to see it. Which makes me think, what have we yet to accomplish, And so to that, what have you yet to accomplish that you're excited for, that you hope to be?
Well, as I mentioned before, I will continue to put what time I can towards the craft here and allow myself to be available to serve however I'm needed. And if that means I get the opportunity, like I said, to go through the line of leadership here and hopefully one day be master of this lodge, that's a great aspiration. But if it means that I'm making pancakes for folks once a month, twice a month, whatever, and setting tables and making sure that food's available for people that need it, then so be that too. I think one of the big things that I've tried to internalize a little more over the last several years is trying to find more humility and, again, apply myself where I'm needed. And if I can give my 2 cents and help solve a problem, great. And if I'm just needed for a simple task, that's great too. And so I think more or less just seeing where my participation takes me. But again, I would be a liar if I said I didn't want to lead this place one day.
And I think that you'd be a really great candidate for it,
Thank you.
Yeah, especially within this conversation, but in all of the times that, I've observed you and stuff. That sounds ridiculous to say that, but you know what I'm talking about. Just being in your vicinity, in your presence, walking with you, talking with you, all that stuff. I've learned very quickly that you are actually a very conscientious guy. You think about things, you care about people, you really want to do your best, and you really want to help people. And I sit there and I think, wow, those are all really great leadership qualities. Something that somebody that master of the lodge should have. So I can definitely see you sitting in the East, and I can see you with the gavel and doing everything that you have to do to take care of us and launch us forward. I know I'm not going to do it.
That's fair. I mean, not everybody wants to do it, and that's understandable. But your contributions are not small to this place either. So whether you aspired to lead the lodge or contribute by the vast amount of things you remember and the way that you conduct yourself in ritual, and it's just fascinating. Like, I wish that I had the memory and the recall abilities that I see in you, but also just genuinely how welcoming you are and how friendly you've been, not just to me, but again, in my observances of you, and how you treat our other candidates and upcoming brethren, as well as our full membership, right? Like, I try and find the things in folks that I like and try and emulate that. And you're one of those folks who just your daily interactions with folks that I see, I have the utmost respect for and hope that I can be that way someday.
Well, thank you. That's actually one of the reasons why I'll let you in on a secret. My favorite working tool is the plumb line. For very similar reasons, right? Because a lot of people tend to think straight up, but a lot of people don't think straight down, And so how many dark, disturbing, horrible things are within each and every human being, and the whole point is to chip away at yourself, or at those rougher parts of yourself. And so, to dig deep and dive into it, and then, to perfect something underneath the surface. It's like an iceberg, or it's like the foundation of a wall. You might see the wall. I'm sure that might be plumb, but what's the foundation look like? So to be able to go down that deep and then come back up, suddenly you're solid. And the best part, the other aspect of the plumb line is that okay, well, if this one aspect of me isn't straight, or I look at somebody else, and I see, wow, that is like smooth. That is like, that's amazing. Jamie Snyder is actually one of my heroes for that, because he sees things that I don't, and vice versa. And so, to watch him in action, it's funny how we all inspire each other anyway, right? We're all each other's heroes. But so what ends up happening with me is, like, sometimes I'll see somebody do something, or what they say or what they do. I remember there was a brother that, like, by all accounts, he seemed like a pretty rough dude, right? But one time I went to his house, and like, there's this picture of, this little girl who could not have been his kid. Okay, I'm just going to say it that way. There was no way that this was his kid. So I said, "Who's this?" And he says, "Oh yeah, that's some girl and I sponsor out in, I don't know, Sierra Leone or Haiti, or I can't remember where."
Yeah.
But he's like, "Yeah, I mean, I make all this money. I don't have any kids. What am I going to do with it?" And I was actually, like, thoroughly inspired. I went, wow, I'm going to take a page,
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that I like about the plumb line personally, is I'm going to take a page, So suddenly, oh shoot, maybe, well, that's how he chipped away at this. Maybe if I do, oh wow, So I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's definitely.
Oh, it does. It's kind of like a lesson I learned in the military long ago, was as you're progressing in your career, and in the Marine Corps, they push leadership on us very early. And basically, if you have anybody who is subordinate to you, you are accountable for them. And it's kind of a mindset I see here now, and I want to continue, right? I am my brother's keeper. And so, that being said, being subject to all forms of leadership styles, as folks change and go from unit to unit and such, one thing that rung true to me was to observe and understand the things that you like and don't like about individual leaders, and to adopt those things that you like, and to essentially toss those things that you don't like, to try and make yourself the best version of what you see in leadership and positive leadership. So that's, yeah, I ride a similar sentiment to, yeah.
We're all an amalgamation.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. So, yeah, I like that. Well, what advice would you give to somebody who's just now starting out, who's considering getting into masonry?
I think my first advice would be to get to know the folks that you might one day call brother. Not everybody's cut out for this. I mean, yes, there's going to be a time commitment, and so that always needs to be a consideration. But that genuinely is only on the front end, if you're really serious about it, right? After that, if it's important to you, you're going to make time. But try and take the time to get to know some of the folks that are members, and see, is this worth your time? Are these the kind of people you want to be around? Are these the kind of people, if you have a family, would you bring them around, or would you have them there with your family? And so do your due diligence, really. Obviously, I love our lodge, but it's not the only lodge. And different lodges do business differently. And not every lodge attracts the same caliber of individual. And so If it's something that you're genuinely interested in, I would also seek out other lodges and see if their membership is more aligned with your personal outlook. But yeah, at the end of the day, it really comes down to just spending the time to do that due diligence.
I like that. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of, and that's one thing that I've heard a lot of, is this isn't the only lodge, and you might fit in with us, you might fit in with some other group of guys. There's something for everybody, and there's someone for everyone.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, we're all brothers, right? And I would treat everybody as such. But I know that this is my mother lodge. This is where I spend most of my fraternal time. And I think if it were a different group of individuals, then my choice to stay here and spend time here and effort may or may not be different. And so, yeah, that's the due diligence piece, I think, is paramount. But second to that, if I could offer a second piece of advice, is think about why you want to be a member. There have been a fair amount of folks that I talk to who see this as just a social networking club, which, don't get me wrong, this has made some of the best relationships, long-standing, fruitful relationships that I've ever had. But I don't think that should be your single motivator to come here. And so it's genuinely like, is this a place where you think you would be willing to contribute? And again, to a statement I made earlier, you get out of it what you put in, often more. But if you don't put in much with regards to time or supporting what the lodge is doing, then you're not going to get those opportunities that you think are there. And so just trying to make sure you're doing it for the right reason.
I like that. Yeah. Yeah. I've noticed that myself. There are a lot of brothers out there who, maybe to them it is a social club, but I sit there and I think, how could you take part in this ritual? How could you listen to the words, learn the words, but somehow not incorporate them into your life? So I kind of have those kinds of questions myself, where I'm like, well, where did we go with that? How did you end up where you are? So.
Yeah, I agree. And again, the folks come here for all sorts of reasons. It's my hope that the interactions that we have with them, should they continue their journey past that due diligence point, right? Whatever they think they are joining for or going to get out of membership, it's my hope that I'm doing the right thing to encourage them to build themselves up better, the way our fraternity advertises, right? Take good men and make them better versions of themselves. And it's a lot of, you don't know what you know, or you don't know what you don't know until you know. And so, that being said too, I look forward to helping and guiding and working and getting to know anybody who crosses that threshold and is willing to commit to this craft.
Right. They've made that step. So, well, I really don't want this conversation to end, because it's gone so well this entire time. And
Agreed.
And it's been, very insightful, and it's actually been really great this is the most that I've heard you speak.
Yeah. I kind of keep to myself and observe quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. So, if there were anything else that you would like to add or to say or to contribute to this conversation before we close off, what would it be?
For those that are members, here, more especially at Fredericksburg 4, and more especially for those that maybe haven't been so active, always welcome back. That was one thing that I took away from my approach to come back to the lodge, is I had a significant gap in presence, but I came back, enjoyed some pancakes on a Saturday morning, and was welcomed with open arms, kind of given the updated tour of the place and the updated, how things are going. And it was just a really nice feeling. For anybody interested in this craft, especially in the Fredericksburg area, I highly recommend y'all come by second Tuesday or second Friday of every month, 6:30. There'll be plenty of folks here who are more than happy to say hello, shake your hand, answer questions. But no, other than that, I look forward to what this journey has in store and trying to make the most of it. So I hope to see more good folk along the way.
That's awesome. Well, Brother Brian, thank you. So it's been a wonderful conversation.
And thank you, Brother Justin, again. Appreciate the time you've taken to put this together and have me on. And maybe one day we'll do a second round.
That sounds wonderful. All right. We'll sign off. Thanks now.